So we have an order of operations problem. Every time you see a negative sign, if it could be a subtraction, then it is a subtraction. This one cannot be a subtraction because it's the first one. Subtract from what? This could be a subtraction, therefore it is a subtraction. Then inside the parentheses, this one again is the first one. Subtract from what? So it describes -4 as a negative number, but this here could be a subtraction, therefore it is a subtraction. So that's good to settle before we even start the problem. So what is the plan here? We're going to subtract 6 from -4, and whatever the result is, -5 minus 7 times that is our problem. So we're going to have -5 minus 7 times the difference between -4 and 6. Okay, let's see. First we have to work the stuff out in the parentheses. So there is a subtraction there. -4 minus 6 is -10. Now we have a multiplication and a subtraction. This is a dangerous little spot. This here is a subtraction, so let's carry it down, and after we carried it, we must ignore. So what are we subtracting? We're subtracting 7 times -10. 7 times -10 is -70, and that's what we are subtracting. To subtract is to add the opposite. -5 minus -70 is the same as -5 plus 70, which is 65. Now let's see this other one. Here is our next problem. Notice that the previous problem and this one is almost identical. Almost. We have this part is identical, so we're going to subtract 7 times -10, but this minus now describes this whole thing. So that means we're going to start with +5. We subtract 7 times that -10, and when we're done, we're going to take the opposite of the whole thing. So taking the opposite, indicated by this minus sign, is going to be the last thing we do. So again, we have to work within the innermost parenthesis first. -4 minus 6. It also helps, although we should always do that on the first line. It also helps to color the parentheses to see what's going on, especially when this topic is new to us. We have a multiplication and a subtraction. Multiplication comes first. What we are subtracting is 7 times -10, which is -70. We're talking about taking the opposite of whatever. Well, to subtract -70 is the same as adding 70. To subtract is to add the opposite. So what we have is the opposite of 75. See what big difference that itty-bitty little change meant, that we put a parenthesis around this expression. Okay, so let's see this one. If on the first line we don't understand what's happening, it's not going to get better later. So it's best if we figure out what is going on right in the first line. So this is not a grouping symbol. This is just identifying this negative sign as part of this number and not subtraction. So we have inside the blue parenthesis, we have a subtraction and a multiplication. Multiplication comes first. So from 5, we're going to subtract. This subtraction, once it carried, must be ignored. So what we are subtracting is 7 times -4. That's -28. And now inside the parenthesis, to subtract is to add the opposite. 5 plus 28 is 33. And so we have -39. Okay, let's see this other one. This is probably an easy one. We see that there are 2 pairs of parentheses, one after the other. In between, the nothing there indicates multiplication. And both parentheses have just one subtraction inside. In the first one, we're subtracting 7 from -5. That's -12. We carry the rest. And then -4 minus 6 is -10. So we're multiplying -12 by -10, which is plus 120. So this is our next problem. Now we have 2 parentheses nested inside of each other. Although this red one is a grouping symbol, the blue one isn't. The blue one is there to modify the role of the minus sign. Without a parenthesis, this negative sign would indicate subtraction. The rule is if it can be subtraction, then it is subtraction. Because of the parenthesis, this negative sign describes this number as negative, and between 7 and -4 there is nothing indicating multiplication. So what's the plan? From 5 we're going to subtract whatever 7 times -4 is. When we're done, we subtract 6, and then we take the opposite of the whole thing. So inside the parenthesis, multiplication comes first. So this minus sign, because it could be subtraction, it is subtraction. And then after we carried it, we must ignore 7 times negative 4. That's negative 28, what we're subtracting. Okay, so now we have two subtractions. We have to go left to right. 5 minus negative 28 is the same as 5 plus 28. Probably can just go straight to 33, but it's always good to be careful. 33 minus 6 is 27, so the answer is negative 27. In this problem, both pairs of parentheses are grouping symbols. We have two subtractions inside the parentheses, and then within the parentheses another subtraction. So we have to work on the innermost parenthesis until that becomes a number. So that's what we'll do. 5 minus 7 minus. When we subtract 6 from 4, what we get is negative 2. So inside the parentheses, we have 5 minus 7 minus negative 2. Two subtractions equally strong, so we must go left to right. 5 minus 7 is negative 2. Kind of an interesting scenario going on here. So we have negative 2 minus negative 2. Now to subtract is to add the opposite. So that's the same as negative 2 plus 2, which is 0. So we're talking about the opposite of 0, which is 0. Now that's kind of strange, but if you look at this and ignore the notation, what are we asked here? We are asked to subtract negative 2 from negative 2. Every time we subtract the number from itself, we must get 0. So our result is reasonable. Okay, in this order of operations problem, there is one grouping symbol, so we must perform that first. So we have minus 5, subtract 7, subtract. 4 minus 6 is negative 2, so we're subtracting negative 2. Now we have two subtractions. They are equally strong, so among them, we must go left to right. Negative 5 minus 7 is negative 12. And to perform the last subtraction, to subtract is to add the opposite. So negative 12 minus negative 2 is the same as negative 12 plus 2. And that's negative 10. Okay, let's see this other one. It's worth comparing the two. See, here we have the minus outside indicating subtraction, and then the parenthesis cuts them off, and then there is plus 4. Here, the parenthesis moved from here to here, and that changes everything. This minus sign is no longer subtraction, but rather describing this number as negative. And now we have a multiplication here because you see two objects with nothing between them, and that indicates multiplication. So we're going to go left to right between the parentheses. The opposite of, we can read this as the opposite of. 5 minus 7 is negative 2, and negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10. So if you want, we can interpret this as negative 1 times. So we can look at this line and think this is negative 1 times negative 2 times negative 10. But that's the opposite of negative 2 times negative 10 is 20. So the answer is negative 20. And that makes sense. 3 negative signs means that the product should be negative. Notice that very little differences in the location of the parentheses make huge changes on the identity of the problem. All right, let's see one more. So in this order of operations problem, this is a grouping symbol. This isn't, because there is not an operation inside the parentheses. What this second pair of parentheses does is tells us that this minus sign is not a subtraction, right? Without the parentheses, we would read it as from 4 subtract 6. But that this minus sign, instead of subtraction, it describes this number as negative. This is a grouping symbol because there is actually an operation to execute inside. So we have the opposite of 5 minus 7 is negative 2. Okay. The opposite of negative 2 is 2. And this is a place to slow down. This minus sign indicates subtraction, and then there is a multiplication. So we start with the multiplication. That means that we are not doing the subtraction yet, so just indicate, carry it, but after we carried it, we must ignore it. We cannot account for it twice. So what are we subtracting? We're subtracting 4 times negative 6. That's negative 24. And then, of course, to subtract is to add the opposite. That is 2 plus 24, which is 26. Okay, let's see this next one. So there is a symmetry here. Because of the parentheses, these minus signs are describing the number as negative. They do not indicate subtraction. So that means that we have a multiplication between -5 and -7, and a multiplication between 4 and -6, and in between the two there is subtraction. So we start with the multiplications left to right. So first we're going to do this one. -5 times -7 is plus 35. We indicate the rest. And now there is a subtraction and a multiplication. We carry the subtraction, which means now we must ignore it. 4 times -6 is -24, and that's what we're subtracting. See, this is the subtraction, this is the number being negative. And now to subtract is to add the opposite. So we have 35 plus 24, which is 59. That's it.